Hi, and welcome to this month's live cast of Chicas, Charlando. We're really excited to have this conversation with you guys again this month. So we just want to start off by acknowledging that today is National HIV Testing Day, and we would like to encourage everyone to get out, get tested, get involved. And you can find testing locations near you at www.hiv.gov. So once again, I'm your host for Chicas Charlando. My name is Zina Hazuri, and we're coming to you from the Latino Commission on AIDS here in New York City. Chicas Charlando is a program of the Commission dedicated to giving women of color, especially Latinx women, a forum to discuss how race, gender, sexuality, and class, and their intersectionalities affect our quality of life. And so this month we'll be talking about intimate partner violence. And we want, like before, we've always said, we want this to be a dialogue between not only us and our panelists, but with you guys that are watching. So please join the conversation. You can do that two ways. You can either text right into the chat box via YouTube or Google Hangouts, or you can tweet us with the hashtag Chicas Charlando, and we'll be fielding all those questions as we go through today's discussion. So to get started, I'd like each of our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. Natalie, do you want to start?
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me, Latino Commission. You know, I love your work. I love all of you guys. I'm Natalie Rubio Torrio. I'm Executive Director of Voces Latinas. We're in Jackson Heights, Queens, and we target immigrant Latinos living with or at high risk for HIV and violence.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Natalie.
Welcome. I'm going to disconnect my phone here.
Okay, I'll introduce myself. My name is Devin Diaz. I do capacity building assistance with the Latino Commission on AIDS. I work specifically with trans-led and trans-focused organizations, providing them with technical assistance and capacity building assistance. And on my own, I'm a freelance writer and essayist. And I write about the trans experience and women's experience moving through the world, I guess.
Great, thanks.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Betancourt. I'm the Deputy Director of Research and Evaluation here at the Latino Commission on AIDS. And we at the Latino Commission on AIDS love Voces Latinas also, so we're so happy that Natalie is joining us. So other than my work here as a Deputy Director, I'm also finishing up my doctorate in my Doctor of Public Health and Epidemiology.
And like I said, my name is Zina Hazuri. I'm a capacity building specialist here at the Latino Commission on AIDS as well. So I do trainings all over the US. Great. So now that we've had a chance to meet everyone, let's jump right into today's topic, which is intimate partner violence. So the first question is for the panelists is, how can women, both cis and trans, begin to recognize the early signs of intimate partner violence?
Should Voces go first?
Yes, absolutely. Voces should always go first.
I think and this is coming both from a professional point of view, but also personal, because I do have two teenage daughters, and I'm very connected to what these young girls are dealing with school, with relationships. So I think that definitely we always hear about the put downs, the controlling kind of a behavior. There's a lot of cultural factors that go into it, because some young women think that it means that he loves me, or it means that he cares more about me, that this is why he doesn't want me to go out. And it gets very confusing when that's, when they think about it in that way. But like I often do you know, I often do with my own, with the young people around here at Voces, but also with my own daughters and their friends is, you know, if it doesn't feel right to you or to somebody around you, you know, you have to say something. You have to talk to that person about it. See how that person's feeling about it. See if that person is maybe feeling and not really able to recognize the controlling, you know, behavior. So I think it's really subtle how it all begins. It's not so clear cut. It's not just the bad language, the put downs in front of everyone, the physical or emotional, but I think it starts little by little, and there's always somebody around that notices. But most of the time, we don't want to say anything, we don't want to do anything, we just kind of want to mind our own business. But like I always say, at least to the young people that I'm around and my daughters are around, you know, if that's a friend and you care about that friend and you see something that's concerning, just ask, just say, just wonder. Not in an intrusive way, but I think these are little, like I said, it starts very subtly, and then it progresses, and we want to try to point it out earlier than later, because then it may be a point where, you know, they definitely shut down. So it makes it a lot harder. So those are just certain signs. But I mean, here at Voces, we also see not necessarily verbalizing, but curfews, when they have to get back by, what they have to check in first. They can't give us an answer. Can they make it? Can they not make it? They don't have their papers on them. They have to make another appointment to come in with the those are also little signs that why are they not able to have what they need to have on them at the time? The fear, obviously, you know, that comes around with reporting or with saying over just asking for help. So I would say those are the first signs that I can think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Natalie, because I was also thinking about how a lot of times, like, there's, especially in the US, there are certain messages that are very sort of clear about what an abusive relationship is when it comes down to something, you know, physical. But then there's this whole spectrum of what occurs in a violent relationship that has to do with manipulation and coercion, and that can take many forms. It can be sexual, it can be financial, it could be sort of setting up these particular rules about maybe, like you said, like a curfew, or whether someone can work or not, or how to raise a child, let's say. And those messages, I feel like, are not really, they're not given to individuals. They're definitely not given to youth and like adolescents. And then, not to make any generalizations, but I think also culturally, for Latinos and maybe for other immigrant groups, that's even less talked about. So, you know, having conversations about what does it mean for a relationship to be coercive emotionally or mentally, so that it's not necessarily these like very concrete ideas of what we have about violence related to, like, you know, someone's hit you or someone's punched you, but language that's used, and also sort of manipulative techniques to make you feel lesser than or stupid. And then again, like you said, if there's other sort of factors involved where maybe someone is not, is dependent on someone for where they are living, or, you know, for food, if they don't have, if their documentation status is up in the air, those are all factors that come into play.
Yeah. I agree with everything that's been said. And listening to Natalie, I love listening to everything she has to say, and want to be Natalie when I grow up.
Me too.
Oh, that's so sweet.
But I think a missing link to like how can women begin to recognize early signs of intimate partner violence. I think it has much to do with unlearning what is normal. Because I think when I was younger, I think I felt that it was normal for a partner to tell me where I could go and what I could do. And then, so by making these like small agreements, they were all amounting to something that leads to intimate partner violence. So I think what Natalie was saying about speaking to her daughters, I think a lot of it is, if that's not normal for you, for partners to set those regulations around you and to control you, isn't normal to you, the minute that you see it, you're going to dismiss it because it's not what you've grown up to believe. But unfortunately, I think everything around us and the culture that we're in points towards women still being kind of dominated by men in so many ways and in so many subtle ways, unfortunately. Like we know that, or culturally a man will be stigmatized for hitting a woman, for example, but not so much for telling her that she can't see her family or something, and like that's abuse as well. It's not always as outright as physical violence, even though that also counts, but it's also in subtle ways that I think that has a lot to do with unlearning.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because like I actually, so this is not as a researcher but as like personal, I was this week having a conversation with my cousin, and we were discussing how, you know, our respective parents, so her dad and my dad were brothers, and how, you know, there were certain things that I noticed growing up about how my parents interacted that I never really had a language for, because my dad was not sort of like this typical like machista guy, but he was like what I always call like a silent authoritarian. And I remember as I got much older, my dad was very, again, controlling, but not in this overt way. And I remember asking my mom once, like, well, why did you never like think of leaving Buffy? And she's like, well, you know, your dad was not a drinker. He never hit me. Right. He worked, he brought home the paycheck. He was a good father to you. Like, I think there's these certain narratives and sort of ways of being socialized across generation where the things that were considered very much like the red flags, like anything that wasn't that particular thing was relatively acceptable. Yeah. Whether you liked it or not, it was like accepted. You know, it's like what you put up with. So I agree with Devin with what she's saying, because I think it's like, I love what you said, like small agreements, and these small agreements happen along the way.
Yeah, I also think sometimes it's like framed from a different way, right? So it's like, well, he just wants to know where you're at all the time. He cares so much about you. And so from people from the outside, sometimes the people from the outside aren't necessarily like, they don't even see it as a red flag, right? So it's like, oh, well, he just wants you to check in all the time because he cares about you. He wants to know where you're at and wants to know you're safe. And when you don't see it as a red flag and people around you are framing it that way, it's really hard to see that as an early sign of something that could possibly turn into something worse, right?
Yeah, I think it is generational. I remember I was a little bit younger, and I was telling my mom about the guy that I was dating and how he had done something, and we were having a conversation about it, and he was basically like trying to convince me that it hadn't happened and making me feel a little bit like crazy. Gaslighting. That I had imagined, like, gaslighting. And then my mother just told me, like, that's how men are. Like, that's just how they are. And like, you can't do much about how they are. So I think it's also accepting like where you accept your advice from. Like, I just decided, like, you know, you hear these things from family, from friends, and you can love them, but also know that they don't know what's best for you, and that they're not offering you good advice because they're not coming from a place where they've challenged that sort of thinking. They've just inherited it.
And if I could, something that I've young kids everywhere is that these with the phones, right? These young girls think that, oh, you know, they have to give their passwords, you know, to their boyfriends, because I trust him, and if I don't, he's not going to trust me. So this whole trust thing, I don't know. It's talk about the manipulation, right? Somehow they're feeling that shows that he should trust me or I should trust him, and this happens everywhere. I see it with the girls group here at BOSIS. Like I said, I see it personally with my daughters and their friends, and I think that's kind of a beginning, right? I think that's kind of a beginning. But I also do want to say that it's so important to have those role models for our girls to see how you know, I'm fortunate and I'm privileged to have a husband that is, I can always say, hey, you know, this isn't the way she should be, or this is, you know, what I'm hoping for her to learn is not what, and then he catches it, and but I just don't, I just think it's so important for even girls. I know we talk about young men having role models, you know, male role models, but I think it's even it's the same as importance for young women to have these positive male role models in their lives that know how to treat them, what to accept, what to not accept. Just so much of that I think is also missing. Those role models, those mentor even relationships. But also going back to Gabriela, what you were saying is that I feel like it goes. You know, he's a good, because this is what I heard all my life too with my father. He's a good provider. You know, he never had food missing. We never needed, you know, we always had what we needed. But was she happy? Was my mother really putting her own happiness and her own, you know, needs aside, her personal emotional needs aside, just for the sake of like getting other like concrete needs met for the family? There's a lot about where we as women, you know, put ourselves is, and then let's just say, you know, young daughters are watching. Like, what is that saying? You know, what is that? What is the message that these young girls are getting from a mom who is putting herself so much aside, that forgetting about her own emotional needs? I don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it sounds like a lot of what we're talking about is like the culture, right? The culture that we grew up in and society. So how can we begin to kind of switch things and change the culture so that we can create a culture that's more supportive of these women who are experiencing intimate partner violence and just women in general?
I mean, I feel like some of the stuff we've already brought up, like what Natalie was saying and what Devin was saying about, you know, having conversations, kind of being aware enough of that maybe certain messages you're getting are what's right for you and what's not. But I also think that, for instance, having conversations that are non-judgmental, because I think there's always this binary of like, you either are staying because you're completely submissive to something, or you're leaving. And it's not so clear sometimes. There's really valid reasons as to why someone might choose to remain in a relationship or stay in a living situation, what have you. So I think that there's always information that people can talk about, which is like, okay, maybe, you know, these are your options. Like so for instance, something very simple, like maybe you're in a coercive relationship where you may not necessarily be in control of sex, right? And you might be concerned about HIV. So PrEP is an option. For those women that are concerned about a pregnancy, let's say, there's contraceptive options that are not, you know, they're not necessarily something that the partner has to know about. PrEP is not something that the partner has to know about. I think that going to speak with a provider who's knowledgeable about these things for your physical health, for your mental health, for your sexual health, is also an option. So not having conversations where if you're the concerned friend, parent, sister, brother, what have you, you can sort of just be able to sort of stand with wherever that person is, and also recognize that any one of us can be in an intimate partner of a violent relationship. It's not something that I think any of us are immune to per se.
Yeah. One of the areas that you mentioned is a big challenge for us here at Voices, because like you guys know, we do a lot of domestic violence prevention, and we try to start where she's at and work with her wherever she's at. But it's really challenging when the systems do not work that way and they only give one option, or they and they really make it impossible for mom or for the woman. I don't know if we can mention other institutions, but for example, so when, like you said, Gabriela, sometimes it's not a reality for a woman to leave just yet or leave. That isn't her reality. She wants the abuse to stop, right? Regardless if it's physical, emotional. But her reality is not to leave. But when she's involved in these systems, she doesn't have any other option, or else her kids could be taken away, or she puts her kids in danger, right? So we often see ourselves advocating, and I mean, really, and we always stand by our clients, no matter what choice they make. Obviously, we assess for their safety first, but that's just one of those areas that it's great to hear and great to plan and think in that way. But when they're involved in these systems, it's just super, super challenging. And I wish we could change. But even the way we're trained, school, what do they teach us when we go into the field of violence and safety planning and shelter placement and, relocating? But what about working with the family, or working with her reality and what her choice is? We don't always work that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's so individual level, but then the other aspect is like institutions in a way can be real, like these systems, these institutions can be real barriers. And I keep thinking about how to also who sort of meet, right? Because like we mentioned, like women that maybe that have children, maybe parents, and they're concerned about their children being taken away, put into foster care, what have you, or someone whose immigration status is here undocumented, let's say, because they're really concerned about either making like a denouncement or leaving. And I also think about like access to care, and maybe we could talk a bit about this, but like let's say for trans women that maybe they're not in a situation where they can access like hormones or medical care, or someone who's concerned about like let's say a pregnancy and having access to that system. So I'm just thinking about how in a way it actually makes things more, as opposed to like that, oh, here's an institution or a system that's supposed to help you.
Yeah, I think for intimate partner violence and for a lot of, I think, issues in recent years has been like the importance of having conversations, which I think is really wonderful. But like people like campus rape, for example, like we're talking about it, but there's still these people are still being like let off. And like similarly, like police officers who are committing murders are being let off as well. So we're speaking about it, and then it's such an overwhelming cycle and how frequently they happen that we just speak about it, and then we don't even have time to recover because there's something else to focus on. So I think focusing on like, I think if your government is trying to tell you what you can or cannot do to your body, if a man who's caused violence towards women is being let off, then that's sending massive cultural messages to everyone around you. And I think about, for example, my mother is was in a domestic intimate partner violence with my father, but whenever I have a very, very vivid memory of her hearing about a woman dying in a situation of intimate partner violence on television, and my mother called her stupid because she didn't leave. And I think that is a really big thing in Latino Latinx communities, where you're meant to grin and bear it and deal with it. So I think when we start to like see the nuance in these women and what their lives and their realities, like everyone had stated before, but I also think having really honest conversations with kids, and not to spoil Big Little Lies for anyone, but for anyone that says watched it, her husband was physically abusing her, and then her son was doing it in school, and he was 5 years old, so he was mimicking what was going on at home. And the way that she handled it, and she said, "You're not going to get in trouble, just tell me what happened and why you did it." And I think that to me is a really good place to start, because if we don't understand the psyche of the abuser, then we're not going to be able to help people who are in their line of fire.
Right. Something at Voces that we're really recently just started with the partnership of another of the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault is a young girls group, 13 to I think 16 years old, and it's really talking about this, about how they see sexual violence, at being a bystander, what that means being a bystander, all covering all these tips, but it's also really starting with themselves. I just think, and we've had many conversations here at Voices about what do we need to do to prevent that woman that we're placing in a shelter today. What would she have needed to avoid that entire situation, right? What would she have needed? And it goes all the way back to being a child, right? To being, as young as we can get them. I just think we need a lot more programs to talk about self-esteem. I know there's a curriculum called Beautiful Me. I don't know if you guys have heard it, where they're going in some of the schools and talking to young girls, elementary school level, about them and how beautiful they are, and talking about they pick any type of, like, your hand and how beautiful your hand, and it's just the appreciation for your hand and your fingers and or your hair. And so I just think that the earlier we can get these messages to our kids, both boys and girls, because we can't have this conversation without including both boys and girls, the better. And again, we're doing this kind of just because we know we need it. And the way Voices has always worked is we have to show there's a need, and then we go for resources and program funding. And we're finding that, oh my gosh, this group loves it, just loves those real conversations that I know many of them are not having at home. They're all Latina, they're not monolingual, but we're doing it in bilingual, both Spanish and English. But these are conversations. We need those spaces, and I think sometimes the school is great, but I don't know. We need other spaces where we can have those real heart-to-heart conversations.
Yeah, I definitely think that any sort of prevention and intervention, like the earlier you start, it's going to have the most impact in the long run. But I wanted to touch on something that Devin said, which is like, you were sharing that your mom had seen, like, that maybe someone had been murdered. by an intimate partner, and that, you know, she was like, oh, this person was really stupid, why didn't they leave? And so I think that's like an important thing to discuss and also kind of demystify, because there are certain things that actually statistically, someone who's in an intimate partner violence is actually more, their risk of violence that might result in murder actually exponentially increases if that person actually leaves or is about to leave. So these are all really important things to consider, because another sort of moment where someone is even more vulnerable is if they happen to be pregnant. And we can unpack it, you know, as to why these things are and what the factors are. But I also think it's interesting because there's been these sort of recent, and it's always happening, right? But it's been in the news. So the Orlando shooter, and there was a young teacher that her ex had come to the school, and it was like a mass shooting at the school. And these were individuals that had already been, had police records where domestic, you know, intimate partner violence had been an issue. And so I think it's also important to put those things into context, that even if someone is sort of making the sort of plans or has left a situation, they're still extremely vulnerable. And sometimes services there's already a lot of inadequacies with the services to begin with, but then those services can't really particularly end just because the person has left that relationship. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And thinking of what you were saying in regards to how the risk for the violence potentially ending in murder rises, I was thinking about the violence that's happened recently against trans women and how it's on the rise, and there have been so many murders that have been taking place, and it's usually a cisgender male, like their identified partner. So how do you think that we can, as a culture, contribute to changing this violence that's happening?
I think it kind of has to do with what we were speaking about as kids, and I think a lot what happens with little boys that grow up to be men is that, so I think it's an issue of homophobia and transphobia happening at once, in an awful cesspool of fear and hate. But what I think is that these little boys that grow into men see abuse happen by people, men older than their family, men surrounding them. And then I think they become fearful of becoming that. And because all of these messages of like, boys are strong, boys are tough, boys, I think they avoid learning how to access their own emotions. And then these children that were once afraid of becoming the abuser may have a higher chance of growing into one. And I think that's like this awful vicious cycle. But I also think, so if a straight cisgender man is sexually or romantically involved with a trans woman, then he is oftentimes seen as gay. And if we're teaching little boys and children really that being seen as gay is the worst thing, then they are going to, I think those feelings are going to come up. And no, if a man identifies as straight and he's interested in being with a trans woman, that doesn't make him gay. He's still free to identify the way that he chooses to identify. But I think the shame of him not being with a real woman in the eyes of society, I think that that contributes to the violence. And I think it's mostly out of fear of how they're going to be perceived. So they need to get sort of like redemption in a way. And I think the way these men redeem themselves and culturally is saying, well, I was tricked, I didn't know, I was fooled into it, and so even now, whenever a trans woman is murdered, and it was an intimate partner violence, people will say that's awful that that person died, but they should have been honest, or they should have been clear with the person about their gender history. And so there's this expectation that trans people must share these intimate details when like I don't share intimate details like about my past with anyone that I'm just meeting. Like I don't owe that person that. And yeah, and I think on the counterpoint, I think trans women are so heavily stigmatized because of what they do, sex work, or all of these murders. So I think it's also what Natalie was saying, an issue of self-esteem. I know a lot of trans women who believe that they can only be in relationships with men that keep them secrets, men that are ashamed of them. They believe that these are the men who are only available to them. So they stay in these relationships because they think this is all that there is. And we haven't had any cultural examples of men coming forward and saying, this is my girlfriend or wife or partner, she's a woman, she's trans, I love her, I want to be with her. So I think largely it has to do with cisgender men who have dated and have been in love with trans women to start that dialogue, but I still don't see that conversation happening.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I also think along with what you were saying about the sort of the intersection of the homophobia and the transphobia is there's also like this element of like what misogyny and almost like let me see if I can say it, the commodification of like the body and anything that is seen as the receptive partner, the sort of the feminine partner is sort of seen as like the value is lesser than. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's almost like it's okay to maltreat that body, murder that body because it's the receptive partner. It's the
or that I think
it's
I
the
see what you're
lesser
saying.
one, you know what I mean?
Yeah, any person who identifies as a woman, cis or trans, like once you declare yourself that way, you've also put yourself up for critique and debate and violence in some ways.
Yeah, and almost like even if you're I'm sort of saying this out, like thinking out loud, but even I imagine for like a cisgender male who's gay or identifies as bi, like even that sort of dynamic between being the bottom and the top, like there's just I feel like there's something there that we don't really talk about, you know. And that's somehow seen as like the weaker, the vulnerable.
There's a dominant and submissive. The dominant submissive dynamic is kind of always there in heterosexual, like gay relationship, like all relationships. And then I think it's amplified when you see how stigmatized trans women are and how glorified cis men are. So I think that dominant submissive, because there aren't spaces for trans women to go, very many for them to go and seek empowerment and build their self-esteem and to be safely dating and being around people. So I think it's culturally like I don't think cis people are setting up their trans friends with their single friends because it's just like the thing of like, oh, are you into trans people? As if like it's like a commodity, it's a thing that you have to be into, whereas it's just a person.
Right. And I think it's always heightened even more for women, trans women, cis women, gender non-conforming, if you're a person of color also, or if you're an immigrant, and not necessarily able to access like quality employment or quality education wherever you live. You know, I don't think it's just in the US.
Yeah, that's important to know. 12 of the 14 trans women murdered this year have been Black trans women. And Monday there was a 17-year-old Black trans woman that was murdered.
Yeah, she's the youngest so far. And I think it's all, and that's another important thing, which is like age, you know, being young, being an adolescent, all things to take into account.
But this is why I love that we especially like I think that conversation started the last classes, Reunión Latina, because there needs to be more of these conversations. I think every time I hear Devin speak, I feel like I learn something else to think, like another thing to think about in the trans community that I never thought about. And I hate to say that, but I'm admitting it. Because why, you know, when I'm listening to you, I'm like, why don't we set up our trans friends with our sisters? You know, like, why? So I do think that we don't have enough of these. We don't, well, let me put it like that. It's kind of risky sometimes to have these conversations, right? I mean, remember when we were at the Reunión Latina panel, it was getting a little, I mean, it was an interesting conversation, but there were many different views, right, in the audience. And people, I think, feel safer or want to feel safer just not to have those conversations, not to risk, I guess, hearing or bringing up other viewpoints. But I think if we don't do this, we constantly remain where we are. We're not going to see any difference. We're going to constantly hear about the murders. We're going to constantly hear about the homophobia, the transphobia. You know, so I really appreciate that. I know LACOA is one of the leaders, and you guys definitely in bringing up these topics, because again, as a provider, and I feel I've been in this field for a while, I learn from you guys, and especially bringing the younger generation. Devin, you represent that younger generation that is teaching us older ones, you know, that we need to think about these things. We need to create those spaces. I know I can create that safe space here, and bring you along to begin or help me have that conversation, right? This is why I commend you guys, because I don't see everybody having these conversations, and I don't think I'm out of the loop when I say that. I really think that we need these spaces and the people.
Thanks.
No, I agree, and that was part of the reason why we put this together. Is after that initial conversation, we're like, we need to be having this conversation, and not just with those of us that are in New York, but we need to be having this conversation across the U.S. and along with everyone. So those of you that are watching live, if you have any questions, comments, and want to add to the conversation, please do so. Like I said, you can do it in the chat box. You can tweet us if you have any questions. But like, we want you guys involved in this conversation, because just like we're all learning something new here. I think through this conversation that we haven't even finished yet, we've all learned something new, and so we would love it if you guys would join the conversation and we can learn something new about services that are being provided or things that people are doing in other locations, right? So you can use the hashtag Chicas Charlando to ask us any questions or give us any comments.
Yeah, and one more thing really quickly before I move on to the next question. I just lost it. Go ahead. It'll come back.
So in your opinion, what kind of influence does the current social and political climate?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I went there. So what kind of influence does the current social and political climate have on intimate partner violence?
So I'm just going to throw this out there. The fact that the President of the United States was taped.
Yeah, that's the
Taped admitting to sexual assault in and of itself just clouds everything as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
That's right, I said.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
that's what I was going to say, and I think people, like, we live on the coast, and like sometimes I forget that there's any other places in New York or the United States besides New York and LA. But there's a whole massive country between these two coasts. And I think, and I'm from Nashville, so I'm from there. And I think there's this thing with like people like just don't want to get involved. I don't think anyone who voted for Donald Trump is like signed on to grabbing women by their genitals. But I also think they believe, well, I want the like promise of America being great, so I'm just going to leave behind the casual mention of sexual assault. And I don't think that there's a disconnect happening, that America can't possibly be great if we're letting that happen as well. Like there's no such thing as like, I'm gonna vote for him because I think he can bring economic prosperity back to this country, and I'm just gonna ignore his casual misogyny, because things like misogyny and assault and complete disregard of women, that like those two things can't exist together. And if like a group of people, which is women, which is a pretty large part of this country, aren't included in that vision of America, then like there's no greatness. And like that's what young girls and that's what women in general are receiving, is that we can bypass your needs to get to what our end goal is, and ultimately like that's going to be what it is, and you're going to have to like deal. So yeah, I think it does a lot of, I think we're gaslit by our government.
Yeah.
Moving
So,
to things and witnessing other things.
Right.
yeah, so Gabriela, I'm so happy that you started in that way. Because it puts everything, I mean, when was the last time that we heard about this, right? That he did this? I think it's just like what both of you have mentioned. I think it's just been lost, like forgotten about, that he's done this, and he's our president. I don't hear about it anymore. Yet, and I'm not going to condone what that comedian did, that picture that comedian took, Kathy Griffin, you know, that picture that he took. But nothing was worse than what he did, was caught on tape saying about against women. Okay. But yet that is not mentioned at all anymore. And the saddest part to me is that other women that voted for him, I mean, right there, he should have dropped out as a candidate for presidency, right? But other women still voted for him. So it's just saying to us that women are not thinking about them first, or about this, is looking at it as sexual assault against women, or thinking that, you know, putting themselves in that place. It really worries me. It concerns me so much about this country and how women are viewing themselves, other women, by allowing this man to be our president. So it's I'm very passionate about this topic when we bring this up, because to me it's just it's unexplainable how some person like this could be in office and really making decisions about our future. But also the message that it's sending to our younger people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that there's something, for me personally, it was a very triggering moment because of my own experiences. But I don't think, I think that that's something that anecdotally and now statistically, like, is starting to come up, that people feel very triggered, or are starting to like have like symptoms of PTSD and symptoms related to anxiety and even really, really young children. But I also was thinking about something and I forgot. Oh, so I'm gonna throw this out there as like the devil's advocate. I can see that maybe someone's like, well, he did this, but that doesn't mean that I condone sexual assault, but I'm voting for him. And I think that cognitive dissonance needs to be talked about, because people have to sort of take ownership. Yes, actually, if you're voting for this person who said that this is what they did, you are condoning this, you know? And so those are really tough conversations to have, because someone may have the very best intention, and I agree with you, Natalie. Like, I found it like ridiculously appalling that, like, what was it, like half of white women like voted for Donald Trump. But you know, there's all these other factors to it, which is like, I think there's a disconnect between sort of white women's experiences and women of color, cisgender women versus trans women, immigrant women versus not, like across class issues. And going back to what we were discussing a little bit earlier, having these conversations requires you to be feeling uncomfortable. And that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to like say, I don't know about this, or I stand corrected, or I need to learn how to regulate my emotions so that I can get through the day. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, thinking back, I was thinking back to what you were saying and then connecting it to what Natalie was saying before about being a bystander and like, why are people just standing by and not really saying anything, and thinking about connecting that with this. And those, I feel like those are the same people, right? Those are the same people that are like bystanders and not necessarily saying anything, or I don't agree with what he said or what he did, but I'm still going to vote for him. I think that those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's almost like when for me, it's also very similar to like this, the Black Lives Matter and someone movement, and someone saying, but all lives matter. And I'm like, that's exactly why Black Lives Matter, and you should be informed and be part of this, especially if you think that all lives matter, right? So I just, to me, it's just, again, it's like this cognitive dissonance, and it's like, we as a, when I say we, I mean collectively in the US, we think of things in very individualistic terms. We're sort of socialized to think that way. And so it's unfortunate that everything really comes down to like, oh, you have to be able to walk in someone's shoes. Yes, but you can also be empathetic and be compassionate, because we're all part of this planet. Like, I don't want to sound so kumbaya, but it's to me, it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I think people don't like, just don't think it affects them. Like people are like, oh, we're denying certain services to women. Like, that's not my problem. But if those services are being denied of women, what makes you think that one day certain services won't be denied of you? Like, I want to know, like, what, like, if certain people are being denied services, and not just making it about women, but just in general, what do you think, if we allow this abuse of power to continue, what will they feel empowered to take next?
Yeah, I agree, but I also feel like on the other side of it, why isn't it also that we think about, if something is being denied to someone else, why can't you see that it's actually being denied to you too?
Yeah.
Do you understand? Like, so it's like, it doesn't have to, like,
Happen to you.
I don't know how to phrase it, but it's like, it's just a different way of thinking about how we form communities, right? And that
It doesn't happen in a vacuum.
it doesn't, no.
No. But also going to your question about how is the political climate?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even before this administration, our community has been affected. Our community has been fearful. Our community has been, discriminated against. And I mean, so we've always here at Voces been struggling with, but there's definitely a challenge getting our community in, because they're so fearful for many different things, right, going on. So of course, after seeing, having this president in office, it's even more so. I don't know if you guys are aware, but every place that I've talked to, including Elmhurst Hospital, which is like a block away from us, their walk-ins have dropped. The number of walk-ins have dropped. The number of walk-ins in every organization here has dropped because of the fear. I mean, we usually get we get walk-ins every day for domestic violence. Okay, off the street. So we don't get referrals. You know, we're getting referrals, but not the number of walk-ins that we're getting from the community. So what is that? So if our community's already been fearful as it is before Trump, what is this message now with this guy in you know, deciding their future? It's really concerning. It's really concerning to me because just to have, you know, I don't know if you, but we took kind of a survey with our domestic violence clients. It takes 3 to 5 times on average for them to walk past our door before they ring the bell and decide to come in. You know, before they just decide to come in, and most of the time they're probably asking for another service before they're asking for any help in violence or testing or anything. And these are domestic violence survivors. So that we've seen a definite job. I mean, it's getting better, and this is why we never stop going out and doing our one-on-one outreach. I mean, our social media is great, but we have to do that one-on-one because they need to see that face, the name, and have those conversations to make them feel safe coming inside asking for services. But yeah, so I always think back at, okay, but this was going on always in our community, the fear, right? And more so right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, what you're bringing up, Natalie, is really important. That this administration is not in a vacuum either. There's a whole history in the United States where, particularly immigrants throughout generations have been placed in situations where they're fearful. And so then it becomes even the challenges become greater, the barriers become greater, and the fear becomes stronger. And I think that as providers, it's really key to always be sort of addressing these from different angles and to maintain a very consistent presence in the community, because I think that's the only way that anyone's ever, as an individual, as a provider, as an organization, you're able to establish a sense of trust, right? Yeah, I don't think that this particular administration came out of the ether. You know, I don't think it came out of a vacuum, and so I think that's an important thing to know.
So we've been discussing so much. We've come to our last question. Before we check in again and see if there's any questions from our viewers. So what are some of the common responses that women are met with when they disclose that they're in a violent relationship?
What are the responses? What was that?
So what are some of the common responses that women are met with when they disclose that they're in a violent relationship?
Well, I could speak to what we do here in the organization. I mean, I think, well, even before I get to that, I think culturally it goes back to, you know, re-victimizing. So, porque se quedó, you know, I didn't go through that, I left, and I didn't have to do that, and oh, she should, you know, like we were talking about before. Also, many of the women that we see, you know, of course, we assess for safety. We do safety planning, and we assess for family or friends that they can stay with, because unfortunately, shelter is not always an option for them. And they tell us that when they reach out to their family, unfortunately, especially their mothers or grandmothers are telling them, well, you know what, you're married. This is who you chose, and this is who you stay with, and this, you know, you have to work it out. Unfortunately, we're still hearing that. Okay, that is very much a real answer that the women are getting. So they have no other, you know, option but to come seeking what we can help them with. But we at Voces really try to begin, and I know we've heard this over and over, but starting where they're at. Again, we we like to think of ourselves as doing non-traditional work. And I get backlash at this a lot of times when I say we do not always offer the shelter as their only option or their only placement. Because I'm going to tell you, more than half the time they leave less than a week and then they're back with the abusive partner. So why am I going to go through that entire process of putting her in shelter when she's going to come back to him? So what we do is really start where she is, and we've even, we explore many different avenues with her as to what she wants to do. Kids, no kids. We've even gone as far as trying to explore other peers. We have a promotora program, that we do the promotora training. We try to have some of our promotoras, identify some promotoras that have access or have a free room in their apartment or in their home as an option for a woman to stay. I have put women in hotels just overnight or maybe for 2 nights until I can get some other place. We have to get creative. We do have to get creative, but we normally, we always have to start with what she is ready to do, because we've been there where we've started where we thought she should be, relocating her, and it's just worked against us where it wasn't her choice, so she's just kind of left that program, right? Or that plan that we put in place for her. So we really try to work with her as to what the plan is that she wants to work on, more of a realistic, whether we agree with it or not. I really stress that we work with her on identifying at least 2 or 3 steps that they want to take, more immediate, and we start from there. And again, other agencies might say no. Most agencies that do domestic violence work are anonymous. They're not going to have people walk in from the street, because the batterer could just be walking in from the street. We're not that way. We that way. So those are kind of the things that voices that we hear, and the way we try to do our work.
Yeah, I just really quickly, I agree 100% with you, Natalie. I think that's something that anecdotally you still hear, like, oh, you made that bed, now you lie on it, But I'm glad that you mentioned the approach that Voces takes, because I think it's very unique and it's actually much more impactful, because a lot of the sort of established, at least in New York City, agencies and programs, again, going back to this very binary, like you have to do these certain things, but there's so many ways of approaching a person who's coming to seek help, and it doesn't have to be so black and white about you either leave or you stay. It's like, what would you like from us as a provider, as an agency? What would you like from us today? What is it that you would like to do? How do you think this will work out for you within a week, within 2 weeks, within a month? Like, what is it that you can do to keep yourself safe today, regardless of whether you choose to leave or not? Is it PrEP? Is it contraception? Is it, making an appointment at a certain time when you know that the partner may not be around and may not be, vigilant or hovering? So,
yeah.
So we've got a question from one of our live viewers, and they want to know what is the role of media in intimate partner violence? Like, what are the messages that we feel like specifically youth are getting from the media, and what does that say, and what kind of role does it play in the culture that we were talking about when it comes to intimate partner violence?
What is the role of media?
Yeah, so specifically around youth. So how does that play a role in it, media and intimate partner violence?
Well, I grew up kind of on social media, and so, but I have a niece who's 14 years old, and she was telling me about, there's like those Instagram comedians that make funny videos, and she just said to show me one that she thought was really funny. And the basis of the video was that a woman did something, and then the guy slapped her, and she that was the funny thing. It was this actor like fell over comedically, and it was funny, and I think that there's a lot of that. I think like we need to start like analyzing like not just the media, but like the art and the entertainment that we consume, and like why is hitting a woman funny, even if there's like, even if it's not real, it's not happening, it's a simulation of things that are very real. And it's very similar to me. It's like, why is a man in a dress funny?
Mm-hmm.
Because men can't wear dresses, or because any person who was assigned male at birth and puts on a dress is essentially just a man in a dress. And so why are we laughing at these things? And why do we find these things entertaining, and why do we seek them out? So, but I think it all happens under this like this humor which is so colored with violence and disregard for any people other than typically white cisgender men. Why do we find that entertaining, and like why aren't we investigating it? Because I think people will be like, oh, I seek enjoyment, I get pleasure from it, so I'm not going to investigate my feelings about it at all.
I definitely agree with you, because there was I think my nephew shared a video of those GIF or whatever, those videos that constantly keep going, like repeating, of a girl scaring her brother and the brother smacking her, and it was like hilarious for them watching her getting smacked. And I was like, what's so funny about this? She's getting smacked over and over, like what? And I just think people don't really see. They're just seeing what's. I don't understand what they found funny in that video. But the other thing that I'm finding extremely disturbing, and maybe you guys are the younger generation that are more on Instagram. There's like these Instagram famous people. You know about this? Like there's famous, like the people who get, I don't know, 10,000 or 1 million followers, or I don't know how the Instagram works all the time, but they're these individuals, and the ones I know are young girls, they're teenagers. My daughters follow them again. And all they're doing in front of the camera are just these seductive like selfies and poses, and like almost, it's so inappropriate because they're young, they're 15, 16-year-olds, and they're getting famous on Instagram for this. So I find it extremely disturbing, because what is the image that we're setting here for these young girls? And how many other girls out there and people are liking, or how do you do it with Instagram? It's what, liking, or like. Okay, so millions, and if you say anything negative about them, they get on your case about. But they're becoming famous. They're actually being asked by certain clothing companies or to hold up their product, and then they'll get a $900 check in the mail, and they're even, this one particular one I'm thinking about is a backless bra that they ask her to put on. And showing that on her Instagram, because she's got like millions of, I guess, followers and likes, and so they're sending her like a $900 check in the mail every time she does that. But there's so many of them out there, and I don't know what they're getting famous for, aside from them just really being sexualized in front of the camera, in front of their, they're doing these selfies, and how they record themselves. And I think that is sending a horrible, horrible message to millions of these young people. But that's what this whole world of social media is about. If you look them up, you'll see them. I don't think they're doing anything positive when they could be, because if they're that famous and they could be doing something positive, sending positive messages to these young girls, that would be great. But they're not.
Yeah.
Find it extremely disturbing, because they're young, they're impressionable, they're young people. I'm not, like, maybe from 10 years old and up to maybe 16, 17, that's who's getting famous doing this.
I mean, I was just gonna say that when I saw this question, I immediately thought of like the Rihanna and Chris Brown thing, and how the media covered what happened. and thinking about other celebrities and how things are covered with them. So for example, recently with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and their divorce, and we see all these celebrities and how so it's like one, how the media is covering these things when they happen, and then two, the fact that these celebrities are still winning awards, and I'm wondering what kind of message does this send to the culture, to everyone who's watching, that these individuals are still receiving awards, and what does that mean for people as they're looking on, that it's okay and you can still move forward, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it says that there's not going to be any consequences.
Yeah.
That you can do these things and you can still have a life after, and like not to say like we need to throw these men into the pits of hell as much as personally I would like to, but it's not going to end if we don't have real conversations and real consequences.
Right.
So that if this happens, if you still don't understand why it is wrong, then the person that you inflicted the violence upon is going to have to live with that. And I think the message is that the person who the violence has been inflicted upon should not be the person carrying the weight. The abuser should also be carrying the weight with them. And I think it's also really important to, like, social media is just a part of our life now. It's a very real daily part of our life. And just because there's millions of comments of people using slurs and like, just because it's the internet doesn't mean we can ignore it. It doesn't mean it's not real. And real people type those words, and it's a real thing that holds weight in the world, and it's not something like that you can just turn off, because there are more and more things in the world is like that you can't do if you don't have the app or if you don't have the phone. Like it's fully integrated, so we need to treat it that way, and there needs to also be consequences for the people who want to use the N-word on comment sections or slurs against trans women or women in general. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I thought of when you were mentioning like what your 14-year-old cousin shows your niece, and Natalie, what you were saying about your nephew, I think that the little girl was getting slapped or something. It's like, it's almost like no time has passed, because the first image that came into my head, and so this is, Natalie, like I think you and I are a little more the peers of the age group, but like, do you remember like I Love Lucy?
Yeah.
And like Desi Arnaz would like spank Lucy like when she acted badly, like, and there was the laugh track, and this was the show. So it's again, it's like nothing happens like in a vacuum. It's all part of this spectrum. But going back to social media, I mean, I think it's neither like wonderful or horrible, social media. I do think that it's a great opportunity for folks, even very, very young community members, to understand and have conversations about the difference between being sex positive and sexual exploitation. And there's a difference between owning and being proud of your sexuality and your body, and that there's nothing wrong with pleasure, and then that's very different, a very different thing from commodifying in an exploitive way, you know? So that's what I hope that can come from social media, that there's a very honest and open and frank conversation, that there is a difference between being sex positive and exploitation. Yeah.
Well, great. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much. So I want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Devin, Gabriella, and Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Natalie.
Bye.
So we're going to go ahead and end today's cast. And I just want to say we'll see you guys next month. We always meet the last Tuesday of every month. So be on the lookout for our emails about what we'll be discussing next month. Thank you again.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.